So today I want to finish up our time of study of, so you want to talk about race. We may come back to it, and I'm certain that as time goes by, the conversation will continue. And we may dive into some other resources because this is something that is near and dear to our hearts and to our mission as a spiritual community. So I just, for now, we're going to wrap up our study of this particular text, and we'll see what happens later on. But this has been really eye-opening for me. Being a straight, cisgendered, male, white boomer, diving into this text and doing the research I've done online to prepare for these talks. And, even just looking at the images that I curate for these slideshows has certainly had its effect. I'm not the same minister that I was when I came to Birmingham in 2013. And I'm not even the same minister today that I was when we began this. And I hope that I continue to evolve. And I hope that all of us, especially, those of us that look like me, make the choice to continue to try to evolve, because that's half the battle, not staying stuck in our past and staying stuck in the things that we were taught, many of which really aren't true, and staying stuck in that white-centric, white supremacist history that that a lot of us grew up in, that culture that we certainly grew up in. If we're ever going to literally come together in unity, we have to make the choice to learn, to be aware, to be willing to swallow some pride and, some other things that make us a little uncomfortable, and to keep reaching out. So yes, we will come back to this, but this is going to be our last week studying this right now. Right. So towards the tail end of the book, So You Want to Talk About Race, Ijeoma Oluo asked this question. It's the title of one of the chapters. Why are our students so angry? And even some of us who have kids that aren't kids of color, are being confronted by a generation that's angry. And it's, sort of her answers to that, I think affect a lot of us. And certainly when you look at what kids of color are up against, they have every right to be angry. She tells the story of her 8-year-old son, who on his own, not because she was preaching at him, but on his own came to the decision that he would not recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And at one point, she's telling the story of him coming back into her room and saying, hey, I know we fought this fight once, but, now there's going to be this, it's like a Veterans Day assembly at school. And, not my teacher who we've already talked to, but this other teacher is saying, I'm going to have to, do the Pledge of Allegiance and all this stuff. And, as she's talking to him, he says this: I don't think this country treats people who look like me very well, so the liberty and justice for all part is a lie. And I don't think that every day we should all be excited about saying a lie. That's coming from an 8-year-old. So if the racial disparities that are built into this country endemically are clearly visible to an 8-year-old child, then there's really no excuse for those of us who are grown up men, women, and gender non-specific human beings to turn a blind eye. And I have a picture of Colin Kaepernick here. And, the thing is when people try to make us aware of those things, even though they make us uncomfortable, we need to be, have our minds and our ears and our hearts open enough that we can hear that, instead of being so upset by the fact that somebody interrupted our white supremacist lives with a protest. Here's Colin just taking a knee during the national anthem, right? Like this 8-year-old boy didn't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance to a country that treats people that look like him the way it treats people that look like him. Colin's trying to raise awareness, and what happened to him is he ends up getting, please excuse the expression, blackballed by the National Football League, and talked horribly about by some of our political leaders, and by, I'm sure, by religious leaders in some of our other houses of worship. And yet, have you ever seen a more polite protest in your life? The guy is taking a knee, for crying out loud. But here's the thing, what these kids are onto is the fact that the stuff they've been told doesn't mesh up with what they're seeing in front of them, right? And I thought this quote was just really revealing. But our kids have seen that, and for those of you on phones, I've got a slide up with this quote. But our kids have seen that no matter what individual progress we make, no matter how good we strive to be, the system remains. Our kids have seen how every compromise we made over the decades has been turned against them now. Our attempts at respectability have been turned into barriers to recognizing our humanity. Our focus on exceptionalism has been used to justify the murder of the less exceptional. Our focus on allowing good people of color to join the ranks of good whites has allowed a criminal justice system to swallow up an entire generation deemed bad. That's kind of it in a nutshell. She talked about what it felt like to grow up back in the 80s when the Cosby Show was on. And it seemed like, if you were a person of color, all you had to do was just try really hard. Just work really hard, stay out of trouble, and you'll get your choice to go to Spelman or Yale or, any of the very best schools that there are. And what's happened is, as time has gone by, we found out that even Bill Cosby was a lie, right? That kindly, mild-mannered dad, Cliff Huxtable, was a predator. And as she points out, things got worse for people of color, starting in the 90s with some of the criminal justice, quote, reform, unquotes. We started just making an institution out of incarcerating massive numbers of Americans of color. So what she comes to is saying, listen, folks, basically the thing that we need to do as grown-ups, as parents, as the older generation, is just try not to screw this thing up so badly that the kids don't have the freedom to do and be what they want to do and be. She says, it is our role not to shape the future, right? But not to fuck things up so badly that our kids will be too busy correcting the past to focus on the future. It is our job to be confused and dismayed by the future generation and trust that if we would just stop trying to control them and instead support them, They will eventually find their way. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to who have told me stories about parents that tried to control them as they were growing up, tried to change them, try to mold them, try to turn them into a better version of what their parents wanted to be, right? And it just caused nothing but problems. When if the parents had just supported their kids, who knows where they could have gone. And that's not just individuals. That is so widespread, it's almost systemic, right? And boy, when you talk about creating messes that our kids are going to have to clean up, I mean, take your pick: the economy, the environment, our system of government right now. I kind of feel like, instead of having an epitaph on my headstone, I should just kind of have a generic apology. Sorry guys, we left you a mess. So that's why they're angry. I mean, honestly, that's why they're angry. They're not stupid, right? They can't drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, so I was born in 1960, which was roughly 15 years after the end of the Second World War. America was the great big hero. We helped, get rid of fascism. We had instituted the Marshall Plan. We were in the process of rebuilding Europe. We were rebuilding Japan. We were fighting the Red Menace. We were the first people on the moon. I watched, right? I watched as an American stepped foot on the moon for the first time. And it was really easy to drink the Kool-Aid back then. Most of the news outlets were, and most means, 2 out of 3, because you had ABC, NBC, and CBS, right? And they were pretty much reporting the same things. And back in the day, they were able to, the people that wanted to shove things under the rug were able to shove a lot of things under the rug. We didn't have the level of transparency. There wasn't everybody with a phone that they could carry around in their pocket, to record video and upload it to the internet. That didn't exist. So a lot of us didn't know better. A lot of us believed the lie, right? Well, our kids can't, because they can see. There are people out there filming what's going on as it's going on and uploading it to the internet live as it's going on. So it's no wonder they're angry, because they can see what's going on in a way that we never could, or that I never could. People in my generation certainly. I'm a tail end boomer basically, and it's a whole different world than the world that I grew up in. One of the things that she gets into in the next chapter is talking about model minorities. And I had never really, that's another one of those things I was like, okay, Ijeoma, what are you talking about here? So this gets to the way that Asian Americans are treated, and how the way they are treated affects the way other people of color are treated. So, this goes way back. Let's go back to when I was a kid, right? Originally coined in 1966 by sociologist William Peterson to profile the socioeconomic success of Japanese Americans, the myth of the, quote, model minority, unquote, has become a collection of stereotypes about Asian Americans, presenting them as an ideal minority group in the eyes of white supremacy. Included in these stereotypes are presumptions of academic and financial success, social and political meekness. I'm going to say that one again. Social and political meekness. A strong work ethic, dominance in math and the sciences, and strict parenting. Peterson's use of model minority was to study the success of Asian Americans, contrasting them with what he termed problem minorities. Now, one of the things that I found out as I was digging into this is, if you remember back at the turn of the last century, there was a lot of kickback from the number of people who were immigrating to the United States from China. And there were some immigration laws laid down that put some very strict numerical restrictions on the number of people that could emigrate from Asia, right? So at some point, and I don't know the exact year, but what they did was they made it easier for professionals from Asia to immigrate to the United States. So if you had an advanced degree, you were a doctor, a lawyer, someone, an engineer, somebody in the profession, somebody who was educated, somebody with some money, and you wanted to come to the United States, you got on the fast track, while the other folks were basically funneled into a very small trickle, right? So part of the appearance of success of those minorities really has a lot to do with the layer, the strata of the society from those geographic areas that were allowed to immigrate. It wasn't an apples and apples kind of comparison that was being made. I mean, you look at people who grew up in the United States, right? I mean, we can look at the success rate of kids that go to Mountain Brook High School or Homewood High School to the kids that go to some of the high schools from the inner city and see, very similar results, right? So it's not magic. It's not rocket science, and it's not a model minority. And this is really insidious. As she points out, the model minority myth is not a myth designed to benefit Asian Americans. It was designed to benefit white supremacy through the exploitation of Asian American labor, the neglect of poor and disenfranchised Asian Americans, the exotification of Asian American culture, the exclusion of Asian Americans from systems of power, the sexual exploitation of Asian American women, and the comparison of the model minority status of Asian Americans to other racial minorities in order to delegitimize the claims of oppression and the struggles of Black and Hispanic Americans. They got used, plain, pure, and simple. They got used by the system, right? And again, we're looking at, a different strata. And as a general rule, as some of the research I dug into pointed out, what we're talking about when we talk about the model citizen Asian Americans is the ones from China, Japan, India, maybe Korea, okay? And when you start taking a look at what has happened to people, some of whom are Filipinos, most of the Pacific Islanders, Vietnamese, Hmong, Thai, those people end up not only in just as bad a shape as the rest of the people of color, the Blacks and Latinx population, but in some cases worse. I think some of the worst numbers of anybody in terms of success in the United States are the Hmong tribesmen that came over after the Vietnam War. And boy, if there's anybody we should have taken care of, it was them. Because they gave up everything, and they, bled and died for us. And, we bring them here and treat them like dirt. It's awful. As she goes along, one of the things that she addresses is, there are going to be times when we as allies are going to be confronted with people in the equality movement that we don't like, people that rub us the wrong way. And she entitles the chapter, "But what if I hate Al Sharpton?" Right? You know, and kind of the subtext is, does that make me a racist? Right? And so she talks about why it was necessary for some people in the racial justice movement to become loud, you know, abrasive, revolutionary. And I thought this quote was really, really telling. She said, "A quieter, gentler voice did not bring a quieter, gentler world. All it did was give people the impression that I was okay with living like a second-class citizen. All it did was increase my burden." But here's the thing. Martin Luther King was not the MLK of his time, not the MLK of legend. Martin Luther King was public enemy number one. And the photo, for those of you who are on your phones, that I have is of Martin Luther King being booked into a jail. People forget about that. You know, we try to gloss over those things. You know, you don't see pictures of him being booked very often. What you see is him speaking in front of huge adoring crowds, because a lot of us like to pretend that, you know, that's me, right? I adore Martin Luther King, right? Yeah, no. People that look like me back when he was doing what he was doing, as a general rule, they thought he belonged in jail, and they put him there. At one point, she says, "Yes, I am a Malcolm," referring to Malcolm X. And Martin and Angela, Marcus, Rosa, Biko, Baldwin, Asada, Harriet, and Nina. I'm fighting for liberation. I'm filled with righteous anger and love. I'm shouting as all before me have in their way. And I'm a human being who was born deserving justice and equality. And that is all you should need to know in order to stand by my side. And boy, if that isn't the case across the board, I don't know what is. You know, a long time ago, I got in on advocating for civil rights for the LGBTQ community, and I felt the exact same way. They are human beings who are born deserving justice and equality, and that's all I need to know, right? And it's the same with people of color. It's the same with women, for crying out loud, right? We are human beings born deserving justice and equality, and that's all anybody needs to know to stand by our side. Are some of us going to rub the others of us the wrong way? Oh yeah. You know, as I was reading this, I was reminded of some of the people that I've met through the years in 12-step that have rubbed me the wrong way, because there's all kinds of folks in those rooms, okay? And not all of them are lovely people, but we are all pulling on the rope in the same direction. You know, we are all trying to beat something that's trying to kill us. And that's all we need to know. And if we can just treat each other with a level of respect and just say, hey, you know, I support you. I support you. Just that much. It makes such a difference. So as we get into, you know, what that feels like, right? When we're advocating, but somebody thinks we're advocating too much or too loudly or too in your face, right? So that's a little something that we call tone policing. And she gets into what that is and what the deal is with it. And she says that tone policing is when someone, usually the privileged person, in a conversation or situation about oppression, shifts the focus of the conversation away from the oppression being discussed to the way it is being discussed. Tone policing prioritizes the comfort of the privileged person in the situation over the oppression of the disadvantaged person. And for those of you on your phones, I found a really great little Miss Manners or Ann Landers kind of piece of art that actually had to do with flatulence, and it shows a woman literally clutching her pearls, and it says, "Someone has soiled the air. What to do? Some suggestions." And there are things like, say, "Oh mercy, I can't breathe." Ever so casually open a window or two. Say nothing and hold your breath. Pray silently. Pray silently. Yeah, that'll help. Someone has soiled the air. And clutching our pearls. That's the response that is essentially tone policing. Oh, you can't. Oh, no, you can't say that. That's, yeah, sorry. So, as Ijeoma points out, hurt feelings and rudeness are not oppression and will always come second to the oppression being discussed. And the meme that I have next to this says, "We're sorry, your request for victim status has been denied. You're being referred to the big girl panties department. Please stand by." So as we go through these discussions, as we, in some cases, as people that look like me, take a few hits, as our beliefs take some hits, as our behaviors take some hits, as we have to, say, mea maxima culpa. We have to really let go of our need to clap back. We have to really be willing to just breathe into it and say, yeah, I hear you. As she says, if you've been privileged enough to not suffer from the cumulative effects of systemic racism and are therefore able to look at racially charged situations one at a time and then let it go, please recognize that very few people of color are able to enter into discussions on racism with the same freedom. That is such a key. And I mean, so we look at, and it's been a while because everybody's been inside, but we look at mass shootings, right? And what everybody in power, people that, the government, the white nationalists, white supremacists, the gun lobby, what they all want us to do is look at all these nationalist white guys that go off and shoot a bunch of people as lone wolves, as one at a time, as isolated incidences, instead of understanding that they are indicative of a large and systemic problem, that this is not a one at a time deal. It's part of something much bigger. Oppressors, period. And I remember talking about this in a lesson about people, or at least we were talking about abusers in abusive relationships. What they want to do is confine the discussion to that one little instance of abuse. All I did was I just lost my temper and I just smacked you around a little bit. It was just, it didn't mean anything. I apologized, right? Instead of looking at how many times has this happened? Or what does it feel like to be the person who has been abused over and over and over and over again? It's not one time for them. It's what my old acting teacher used to call an accumulation of events. And when that accumulation is your entire life, you cannot divorce an instance from the rest of it. So, me as a white guy that grew up in Vienna, West Virginia, if I see an incident of racism, that's pretty unusual for me because there wasn't any races there. But for a person of color, it's their whole life. And I have to be willing to open my mind and my heart and have some understanding, have some empathy for that, if I'm really going to get into the conversation about what all this means. At the end of the day, you know, the big thing is there is no neutral ground in this, right? And the title of the slide right now, for those of you on your phones, is No Racial Switzerland. There is no racial Switzerland. As she says, if you live in this system of white supremacy, you're either fighting the system or you are complicit. There is no neutrality to be had towards systems of injustice. It is not something you can just opt out of. If you believe in justice and equality, we're all in this together, whether you like me or not. And that's the truth. We're all in this together, whether you like me or not. You may not like the way that I go about fighting injustice. I don't care. I'm going to keep doing it, right? And so she. And so are all of the people who are out there doing that. And at some level, we have to decide, are we with them or against them? Because there's no, I don't think about that. I don't think about that is against. It's that simple. And yeah, there are a lot of people that would like to sugarcoat their way out of that, you know, would like to just false positivity their way into eternal bliss, you know, staring at their crystals and smelling their incense. There's no justice there. As Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So she talks about what happens when somebody calls you a racist or says that something you did was based on a racist principle or a racist fear. And how do we get around that? And among the things she points out is it takes a lot of bravery for people of color to call people that look like me out. It is a hugely difficult thing. And, you know, she says that when I asked a group of people of color what they feared most when talking about racism, their number one concern was retaliation. And she tells some stories about, you know, her being retaliated against for pointing out somebody doing something that was racist, and other people that she knows when they had done things, you know, the kind of actual retaliation that they faced, which, you know, included is lost relationships, lost jobs, physical threats. I mean, it's amazing how much in this racist environment, white people will absolutely lose their stuff if you accuse them of being racist, right? So she asked the question, you know, well, then why do we talk about racism if it's so risky and painful? Answer, because we have no choice, because not talking about it is killing us. So one of the big things that I took away from him, and she, you know, writes a lot of things for us to remember, if I, as a white guy, get called out on something, right? One of the most important pieces in that I pulled out was that your intentions cannot erase the harm that your actions cause. It doesn't matter what I intended when I said a certain thing, you know, or I did a certain thing. If it smacked somebody who is a person of color as being racist, and they're brave enough to tell me, I don't need to be making excuses for that because I didn't intend to hurt their feelings. I just need to own it, right? Own it, learn from it, go forward, and don't do the same thing again. So at the end of the day, right, at the end of the book, she says, talking is great, right? Because that's what it's about. So you want to talk about race. Talking is great. But what else can I do? And I love this. She says, but understanding, and that's what we're trying to get to when we talk, right? I'm trying to understand the thing in your brain. You're trying to understand the thing in my brain, right? We try to understand each other's ideation, and we communicate, and hopefully we can come to a meeting of the minds. But even having done that, understanding on its own will never equal action. There are a lot of complex issues out there that many of us have talked a lot about and understand fairly well. Take, for example, global warming. The vast majority of Americans believe in global warming and understand that it is likely brought on by pollution. And while we talk about global warming and worry about global warming, most of us go about our days the same as we did before we ever heard the term, because it's just easier to talk than to do, and global warming continues. And so does racism. So, some suggestions, right? What can we do to help end racism in this country? Vote local. Get in schools. Get involved in your local school, whether it's just, checking out what kinds of things they're teaching, how they're spending their money, just showing up, being involved. Bear witness. If you're somebody like me and you see a person of color being harassed by the police, show up. Just kind of say, hey, how's it going? What's going on here? Speak up in your unions if you happen to be a person who is part of a union. Boycott banks that prey on people of color. Give money to organizations working to fight racial oppression and support communities of color. Boycott businesses that exploit workers of color. Support music, film, television, art, and books created by people of color. Support increases in the minimum wage. Push your mayor and city council for police reform. Demand college diversity. And vote for diverse government representatives. There are all those, and none of us can do all those things, right? Even if I was just paid to be a professional rabble rouser and agitator, I couldn't do all that stuff, right? But I can pick something, right? I can do something. And I want to, I think I'm probably preaching to the already saved, here. But if I can do nothing else, I want to encourage everyone to make sure that you are registered to vote and vote. And don't just vote in the national elections. Vote in every little election that comes on, and get educated before you vote as to who these people are. What are their views? What are their qualifications? Is that really somebody that you want representing you at whatever level it may be? And trust me, the closer to home they are, the greater an effect they can have on our lives. Okay.